I am 63 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed I understood what mattered. I had built a steady career, lived in a comfortable home, and raised my children. I had traveled to many countries, dined in fine restaurants, seen the mountains of Europe and the beaches of the Caribbean. I thought I had experienced enough of life to say, I know how the world works. But sometime last year, I started waking up with a quiet emptiness. Not the painful kind, not depression, but a sort of dullness, like food that's lost its flavor. The days began to blur together. Nothing was wrong, but nothing felt alive either. One evening, I came across an online journal entry written by a backpacker who had stayed with a farming family in the Philippines. It was brief, just a few hundred words, but something about it lingered with me. The way they spoke of life stripped down to its core. Meals cooked over fire, sunrises over rice paddies, the unspoken love between family members. It stirred something inside me that I didn't know I had buried. I made the decision within a week. After reaching out through a cultural immersion program, I was matched with a host family in a rural part of the Philippines. No hotel, no tour guide, just me, a backpack, and a willingness to be uncomfortable. The journey to their home was long. From Manila, I took a bus through winding roads and smaller towns. As the hours passed, the landscape changed. Buildings gave way to trees, then to open fields. We passed farmers walking with their tools slung over their shoulders, women selling fruit on the roadside, and children splashing in streams. The bus dropped me off at a small town market where a tricycle driver waited with my name handwritten on a piece of cardboard. His name was Tony. He didn't speak English, but he smiled warmly and loaded my bag onto the tiny sidecar. The ride to the village was slow and bumpy. We passed through gravel roads surrounded by coconut trees and mango orchards. Roosters darted across the road. Dogs lounged in patches of shade. Finally, we arrived. The house was smaller than I had imagined. It stood on stilts made of wood and bamboo. The roof was made of nipa palm. Clotheslines were strung between trees, filled with faded shirts, shorts, and baby clothes. Chickens clucked nearby, and I could hear laughter from children behind the house. The father, Lito, came out to greet me. He was shorter than I expected, wiry but strong. His hands were calloused and stained from years of working the land. His smile was wide, and his handshake was firm. His wife, Rosa, stepped out a moment later, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was soft and lined, her eyes warm but observant. They didn't speak much English, but they made me feel welcome instantly. Their children were hesitant at first. The eldest, Angel, was 16 and already helping her parents run the household. The middle child, Yona, was 10, shy and curious. The youngest, 7-year-old Nico, peeked at me from behind the water barrel and ran away when I waved. They led me inside. The house had 2 rooms, a shared bedroom and a main area with a small table, a few chairs, and a single electric fan. The kitchen was a separate shelter behind the house, open to the air, with a clay stove and stacks of firewood. The bathroom was a squat toilet behind a bamboo wall. The water came from a hand pump. There were no locks, no mirrors, no refrigerator, and yet it was spotless. They offered me a woven sleeping mat on the floor, a mosquito net, and a small pillow. I had brought my own blanket. I nodded, grateful, and sat down as Rosa placed a steaming bowl of food in front of me: white rice, sautéed leafy greens, and fried dried fish. A small tin cup held sweetened coffee. We didn't talk much that first meal. Lito said something in their language. Rosa laughed softly, and the children watched me with wide eyes. I smiled, nodded, and tried to mimic their gestures. They smiled back. After dinner, we sat outside on a wooden bench as the sun disappeared behind the trees. Fireflies flickered above the grass. The air was still, warm but gentle. Lito pointed at the stars and said their names in Filipino. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the meaning. It was a quiet moment, but it settled something in me. That night, I slept surprisingly well, despite the hard floor, the distant barking dogs, and the crowing roosters that never seemed to sleep. The next morning, I woke before the sun, not by alarm, but by life itself. I heard the rustle of Rosa starting the fire in the kitchen, the creak of wood as Angel swept the floor, the faint crow of a rooster in the distance. I stepped outside and found Lito already preparing to leave for the field. He handed me a straw hat, pointed to the rubber boots near the door, and smiled. "Come," he said. I nodded, unsure of what I was walking into. We took a narrow path through tall grass toward the rice paddies. The world was bathed in gray light, the dawn just beginning to rise. Mist hovered over the field like a veil. The mud was thick, and I stumbled more than once. Lito laughed each time and offered his hand without saying a word. The work was repetitive, planting rice seedlings into the muddy water, row by row. My back ached almost immediately, my hands blistered by mid-morning. But Lito never stopped. He moved with rhythm, with familiarity, like the land and his body had been having this conversation for decades. At one point, Rosa arrived with breakfast, boiled bananas, bread, and more coffee. We ate under a small tree, using banana leaves as plates. The sun rose slowly behind us, illuminating the fields in golden light. After breakfast, we returned to the house for rest. The heat of the day was thick, pressing down like a weight. The children rested on mats in the corner, while Rosa and I cleaned up the dishes. She handed me a rag and showed me how to dry the tin plates. She didn't speak, just gestured, and I followed. She smiled when I got it right. In the afternoon, I helped Angel gather vegetables from the garden: eggplant, okra, string beans. She showed me how to avoid the thorny vines, how to twist the stalks without breaking them. We worked in silence, but with a kind of shared rhythm. I began to understand that language was not always necessary for connection. That evening, we all walked to a neighbor's house where someone had slaughtered a pig for a community feast. It was a small celebration, someone's birthday, though I never learned whose. There were maybe 20 people gathered around long wooden tables. Dishes were passed hand to hand. People laughed, told stories, played guitar. Children ran in circles, chasing each other barefoot across the grass. I was the only foreigner there, but I didn't feel out of place. An old man handed me a glass of coconut wine. I accepted it, raised it to my lips, and was met with cheers and claps. I laughed. They laughed harder, and for the first time in years, I felt light. I returned home that night full, not just from food, but from joy. The kind of joy that sneaks up on you when you aren't chasing anything. I slept soundly, listening to the wind rustle through the bamboo walls. By the third day, the routines no longer felt foreign. I woke before the sun without needing the rooster to remind me. I rose from my sleeping mat quietly, folding it and tying up the mosquito net, careful not to wake the others. I washed my face with water from a bucket. The cold was bracing, but it refreshed me. I had begun to enjoy the simplicity of these motions, the way each task, though small, was deliberate. The days followed a natural rhythm. Wake early, work in the fields, eat, rest, repeat. But within that rhythm, something began to shift. I wasn't just observing anymore. I was participating. That morning, Lito showed me how to guide the carabao, a massive water buffalo that plowed the soil before planting. He handed me a rope, gave a single command in his language, and pointed to the muddy path. I hesitated, unsure, but took the rope. The carabao snorted and looked back at me with what felt like judgment, but it moved forward. I stumbled as we walked, the thick mud nearly pulling off my boots. But Lito watched patiently, only stepping in when I tugged too hard or too fast. His corrections were gentle, his demeanor calm. This wasn't just farming. It was a way of life built on patience and understanding, not control. Later, we sat under the shade of a mango tree. Lito handed me a piece of dried fish wrapped in banana leaf. We didn't talk. We chewed in silence, looking out at the fields. The stillness around us was filled with texture, the hum of insects, the distant laughter of children, the rustling of trees. That silence taught me something I hadn't realized before. Back home, silence often felt awkward or heavy. We filled it with noise, with background music, with endless scrolling on phones. But here, silence was part of the conversation. It was space to breathe, to observe, to just be. Later that day, Rosa let me join her in the outdoor kitchen. She motioned for me to sit on a low stool beside her as she began preparing the day's lunch. She had a small knife, a chopping board made of old wood, and a basin full of vegetables. I offered to help. She gave me a handful of string beans and demonstrated how to snap off the ends and break them into equal pieces. Her hands moved quickly, confidently. I did my best to follow, fumbling at first, but she gave no judgment, only a quiet smile. As we worked, the radio played softly in the background. It was an old battery-powered unit, its voice faint and crackly, playing music in a language I didn't understand. But Rosa hummed along as she stirred a pot, her voice sweet and low. She sang as though no one was listening, and I felt honored just to witness the moment. We ate together that afternoon under the mango tree. Rice, sautéed vegetables, and a small bowl of meat that had been shared among several households. It was a modest meal, but every bite was intentional. Everyone waited until the eldest had taken their first spoonful. There were no phones at the table, no television in the background, just conversation and the clinking of metal spoons against tin plates. Angel, the eldest daughter, surprised me that evening by sitting next to me after dinner and asking, "What is your country like?" Her English was hesitant but clear. I thought for a moment, "It's busy," I said. "Tall buildings, cold weather in some places, lots of people rushing everywhere." She looked confused. "Always rushing?" I nodded. "Even when they have nowhere to go." She laughed lightly. "That sounds tiring." "It is," I admitted. She nodded thoughtfully, then looked around at her home. "We don't have many things," she said, "but we don't feel poor." That sentence stuck with me. I had spent a lifetime surrounded by abundance. Every need met instantly. Online deliveries, fast food, climate control, entertainment on demand. But I couldn't remember the last time I had sat with my family and eaten a meal with no distractions, or watched the sunset without checking the time. That evening, the sky turned a color I could only describe as fire-touched lavender. The horizon shimmered with fading light. Nico, the youngest child, came running toward me with a kite made of plastic and sticks. He grabbed my hand and pulled me into the open field. Together, we ran. He laughed uncontrollably as the kite danced above us. I laughed too, not out of politeness, but out of something that had been dormant in me for years. A joy that was weightless, childlike. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my mat, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet symphony outside. Crickets, the distant call of a night bird, the rhythmic creaking of bamboo in the wind. I thought about my life, the things I had accumulated, the milestones I had checked off. And yet, here in this small home, surrounded by people who had so little by the world's standards, I felt richer than I ever had. The next morning, I woke to find Rosa already in the garden. She motioned for me to join her. We harvested root crops, cassava, taro, sweet potatoes. She showed me how to twist them gently from the earth without breaking them. It was hard work, but there was something deeply satisfying about pulling food from the soil with your own hands. Back at the house, Jonah, the middle child, brought out a photo album. She sat beside me and flipped through pages filled with faded photographs, birthdays, baptisms, graduations, family reunions. She pointed out relatives, naming each one carefully. I couldn't understand all the words, but I understood the pride in her voice, the love etched into each image. I realized then how similar we all are. Across cultures, across oceans, people want the same things: connection, safety, a sense of belonging. The joy of watching your child grow, the comfort of familiar faces, the pride in showing your life to someone who truly looks. Later that afternoon, a neighbor dropped by, an older man named Mang Isco with leathery skin and a wide smile. He brought a basket of bananas from his tree. I watched as Rosa offered him coffee, and they sat on the porch talking and laughing for nearly an hour. No transaction, no rush, just the joy of company. When he left, I asked Lito, "Do you know him well?" He smiled and said, "He is my neighbor, my friend, like family." I thought about my own neighbors back home. I barely knew them. Most of our interactions were waves from driveways or nods in elevators. That night, I wrote in my journal by flashlight. I wrote about the feel of the soil between my fingers, the sound of Angel's laughter, the quiet dignity in Lito's posture as he surveyed the field, the way Rosa tucked the mosquito net around her children before bed. I wrote about how, in just a few days, these strangers had become family. I also wrote about fear, the fear that when I returned home, I would lose this, that I would forget how the sunset looks when you actually take the time to watch it, that I would be swept back into the noise, the screens, the to-do lists, that I would once again confuse busyness with meaning. But I reminded myself, this wasn't just a trip, it was a transformation. And transformations don't disappear. They stay with you. They shape how you walk through the world, how you speak, how you listen, even after you leave. The morning of my 6th day began with an unusual quiet. There was still the distant call of roosters, the soft sweep of brooms against the floor, and the crackle of firewood. But everything felt slower, more intentional. Or maybe it was just me, holding on to every moment a little tighter, knowing they were running out. I stepped outside and saw Rosa at the garden with Angel, harvesting kangkong. Lito was sharpening a blade near the woodpile. He looked up and gave me a nod, the kind of nod we had exchanged all week, wordless but full of meaning. It no longer felt like a greeting. It felt like family. Breakfast was slightly different that day. There was a sweet rice cake Rosa had prepared the night before. Nico presented it to me like a prize, smiling shyly and waiting for my reaction. I took a bite. It was soft, sticky, warm, and just sweet enough to remind me of holidays back home. I smiled and gave a thumbs up. He giggled and ran off. The rest of the morning passed like the others. Fieldwork, rest, small tasks. But there was a kind of quiet reverence to everything. Everyone knew I was leaving tomorrow. That afternoon, Lito surprised me by asking if I wanted to visit the river. It was a short walk from the village, and we were joined by the children and a few neighbors. The path wound through banana groves, across a rickety bamboo bridge, and opened up to a wide, shallow river, with water so clear I could see the stones on the bottom. The children jumped in first, clothes and all, splashing each other, laughing freely. Jonah tried to teach me how to skip stones across the surface. I failed miserably. She laughed each time the rock plunked instead of skipping. I laughed too. Lito sat on a flat rock nearby, legs in the water, face turned toward the sun. "This is our place to rest," he said, slowly in English. "Good water, good sky, good life. Good life." It wasn't poetic or grand, but the truth of it struck me deeply. It was everything I had been trying to name all week long. We stayed by the river until the sun dipped low. On the way back, we carried firewood, collected wild lemongrass, and stopped to pick ripe guavas. It was the kind of walk that wasn't about getting anywhere fast. Every step was part of the experience. When we arrived home, the family had planned a small farewell gathering. Word had spread to the neighbors. A few arrived carrying baskets of fruits, sticky rice, cassava cakes, and sweet potatoes. Someone brought a small guitar. Another carried a bottle of homemade coconut wine. We ate together under the stars, seated on mats and old benches. Lito and Rosa prepared grilled tilapia wrapped in banana leaves. Rosa insisted I take the biggest portion. They gave me a place of honor, not out of obligation, but because they truly wanted me there. That distinction mattered. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was kin. There was music and singing. The children performed a folk song they had practiced earlier in the day. Angel sang a verse alone, her voice soft but strong. Jonah played a rhythm on a tin can with a spoon. Nico twirled with a ribbon made of palm leaves. It was clumsy and perfect. They asked me to sing something from my country. I hesitated, feeling self-conscious, but eventually sang a song I used to hum to my children when they were little. My voice cracked halfway through. No one laughed. Instead, Lito clapped slowly, and everyone joined in. Rosa smiled, her eyes gleaming with kindness. Then, to my surprise, the children presented me with a gift, a hand-drawn picture on cardboard, showing our time together. There were rice fields, a carabao, the river, their home, and all of us standing together, smiling stick figures under a bright yellow sun. At the top, in their neatest handwriting, it read, "Thank you for being part of our family." I had to look away for a moment. My throat tightened. That simple drawing, so innocent, so sincere, meant more to me than anything I had bought, earned, or received in years. Later that night, when the others had gone to sleep, I stayed outside a little longer. The moon was bright, the stars clearer than I had ever seen them. I thought of my own family, thousands of miles away, my children grown, my house full of things I barely used. I thought of the clutter I had accepted as normal, the distractions I had mistaken for purpose. I realized that what this family had given me wasn't just hospitality. It was clarity. They had reminded me of how good life can be when you slow down enough to feel it, when you treat every meal like a gift, when you let work and rest live in balance, when you give without expecting anything in return. My final morning came too soon. I packed my bag quietly. The children were already awake, sitting outside waiting for me. Angel handed me a small bag of dried mangoes for the trip. Jonah hugged me tightly. Nico stood by the tree, holding my walking stick, unwilling to speak. Rosa placed a small bundle in my backpack. Wrapped in cloth was rice, boiled eggs, and a handwritten note in broken English. "Thank you for being our friend. Come back someday? We will wait." Lito didn't say much. He just stood beside me, looking at the road. When the tricycle arrived, he helped me with my things, then extended his hand. But instead of shaking it, I embraced him. His arms were strong and steady. He patted my back once, and that was enough. As the tricycle pulled away, I looked back. They stood outside their home, waving, smiling, holding the children's drawing high in the air like a flag. I waved until they disappeared behind the trees. The ride back to town was quiet. My mind was full, my heart even more so. When I finally returned home to paved roads, supermarkets, and silence, I found myself overwhelmed. Everything felt too loud, too fast, too artificial. I looked around my house, my polished furniture, my stainless steel appliances, my neatly arranged bookshelves, and I realized I had built a beautiful shell, but one that often felt empty. That first night back, I didn't turn on the television. I opened my windows. I ate simply, just rice and vegetables. I sat in silence, no distractions. And I thought of the family who had taken me in, without hesitation, and given me something I hadn't even known I was missing. I pinned the children's drawing to my wall. I read Rosa's note again, and again. The days passed, but I couldn't let go of what I had learned. I didn't want to. I began making small changes. I started cooking more meals from scratch. I turned off my phone during dinner. I began planting herbs in the backyard, not just for the food, but for the ritual. I started walking more, taking in the sky, the wind, the way sunlight touches the earth when no one is watching. I started writing letters again, real letters, like the one I sent to Lido and Rosa with pictures I had taken and words I hoped they could understand. In time, friends began to ask me what had changed. "You seem different," one said, "calmer, lighter." And I smiled, because I was. It had only been 7 days. But those 7 days changed how I see the world, how I value time, how I define wealth. At 63 years old, I didn't just take a trip, I accepted a gift. The gift of seeing life through different eyes. Of remembering that happiness lives not in abundance, but in enough. That the deepest joys often come from the simplest moments, a shared meal, a morning breeze, a walk to the river. And that family is not always blood. Sometimes it's the people who let you into their home with nothing to gain and everything to give.